Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing gender-based violence in sports with our special guests, Angie and Earl. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we are really excited, especially myself as an avid sports viewer. As of recording this episode, we are currently in the midst of the NBA Finals. We've got OTAs coming up with NFL teams, baseball season in the heat of it. If you're a Tigers fan like me, I'm sorry that we had the worst month of sports that we've had in 25 years last month. So we're in the heat of a lot of different sports things happening. World Cup is in a week. So this is a really timely kind of conversation, at least, especially with some of the news that has come out about some athletes that play for my rival team in the Green Bay Packers. But before we jump into this conversation, would you both like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Sean and Amanda. My name is Angie Hattery, and I'm a professor of women and gender studies, and I co-direct the Center for the Study and Prevention of Gender-Based Violence at the University of Delaware.
My name is Earl Smith, and I'm a sociologist, and I'm currently involved with the Center for the Study and Prevention of Gender-Based Violence at the University of Delaware.
So, as everybody can see, we have some experts with us today, which we're really appreciative of. Obviously, the work Sean and I do is heavily involved with some of the same things that they do. But it's really, really nice to have some experts on us. I mean, we've got a whole lot of knowledge coming at you all from these two people. So we will try and keep it as simple as we can so that everybody can understand everything that's going on. And since I am probably the not smartest one here, if I don't understand something, I'm going to ask so that you can understand as well.
Yeah, thanks for deciding to join us for sports, Amanda.
Yeah, it's not my my biggest forte, but I texted Sean before this and I was like, "Hey, give me some names to look up so that like I am not completely just in the dark when all this happens." And I did a lot of research, and I'm just going to say none of it's probably going to be any good for this conversation because I still can't remember a single like name. But it took me down some rabbit holes that like I learned a lot when I was researching. So
Yeah. So really just jumping kind of into the conversation a little bit, looking at, as somebody who has played sports in most of my life, a lot of the sports that we end up playing too, especially as men, are sports that really push us towards violence. Just thinking about the NFL, which is the most important sport in the United States. Soccer, one of the most important sports across the world, has violence that takes place during the games. So we put a lot of emphasis on the violent acts that can take place during sports. So really looking at how is it that sports, especially these sports that are violent, tend to push violence, and then looking at it from a different, or at least rephrasing that a little bit. How is violence becoming more acceptable because of the sports that we're viewing?
Actually, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
To answer the question, it's normalized. It's expected. It's rooted for in the fan base. And so if you went out and you paid that high price for the ticket to get in the stadium and people were just running around and not hitting each other, whether it's on the ice in hockey or the football field or the rugby field, you wouldn't be happy. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's normalized and it's a part of what goes on in most sports. Uh, some I won't mention because I'm still waiting to watch a particular contest that just took place this week. Um, I want to start by saying that sports are important in American society. They
Mm-hmm.
are of
Yeah.
high esteem. Uh, Sport has become a legitimate institution like Congress, like religion, like education. It's an entity unto itself. Um, Most of my professional career as an academic has been on small campuses or campuses. They could be small, some of them are large, but they're in small towns.
Mm-hmm.
And the campus essentially overpowers the town, not like Michigan, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So in those kinds of town and gown uh, complexes, one of the things that has always struck me was how the populace, most, for example, who are not involved with the academic institutions that are there, these are just townspeople. They'll go out and they'll have their minivans painted the colors of the team. They'll have special little programs for whether it comes out of the PTA or wherever, where on the part of women, for example, as I witnessed, I'm a sociologist, so my job is to observe, would go out and buy high price winter Parkers in the colors of the team. So I'm trying to make the case here that I'm a sports fan, just like you, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up playing sports. I think I was good at it, but this is in the day of self-adulation. I'm going to pat myself on the back and not wait for you to do that. And so I know about sports, but here's what I didn't know. I didn't know the dark side. And we have a concept in our work called sports work. And we think it's unique because it summarizes what happens. But I grew up in New York, and I'm gonna tell you, in that time, I never heard about the the travails of Whitey Ford or Mickey Mantle, who at the end of his life jumped the line for a liver. I never heard of the skirmishes after the games. When Joe Willie Namath came to town, you heard about it because he made sure you heard about it. So these were things I grew up with, but it wasn't until we started studying sports several decades ago that it became clear that there is a dark side to this entity. And one of the ways we know this professionally is in our research, in our empirical research, fact-based, evidence-based research, we have a hard time getting through the peer review process, getting to the journals, because people don't want to hear about this. Mm-hmm. They don't want to hear about the homicides in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear about the assaults by esteemed coaches against kids, and they definitely don't want to hear about spousal abuse and rape and so forth. So this is what we do, and this is what we're going to talk about here. One of the entities that help us with our work is we took the time, and it was a lot of time and some money, to build a database publicly accessible database where currently we have over 500 cases across all sports, including women who are involved in sports world. And we track these cases. We've been lucky to have a good set of undergraduate and graduate research assistants. And we try to pay attention to those activities. And here's the problem. They're coming at us so fast that we can't keep up with it. These cases don't make the front page of any news, even the sporting news, even the big shots sporting news. And so we have people who pay attention to these activities. They have good search skills. We have good technology that helps us with the searches. So we have that database, which we can talk about more later. But I want to bring to our attention a high-profile case that summarizes the ups and downs of trying to understand gender-based violence in sports. And I'll start with a very high-profile case, Trevor Bauer. Trevor Bauer won the Cy Young Award in 2020. It was obviously, maybe he wouldn't have won it if it was a full season, but it was a COVID-reduced season. And at the time, he was with Cincinnati. A woman testified that he beat her up. And one of our mottos is that if she tells you, this probably comes from Maya Angelou, but if she tells you he did it, believe her. And one of the things we see, and I thank the late Maya Angelou for that, one of the things we see is that we have all these Epstein survivors who have had the opportunity to come on national television, but nobody believes them. There hasn't been one conviction other than Miss Maxwell. Not one. And you have thousands of these survivors telling us. You haven't heard about it this week because it's out of the news, but telling us year after year after year, this is what happened. So you reduce that down into the institution of sport. This young lady, I'm forgetting her name, Lindsey Hill. Lindsey Hill said that Trevor Bauer beat her up, strangled her, raped her, and miraculously, there was a conviction of some sort. I'm not a legal scholar. These things are complicated, but something happened. And on the scale of accountability, Major League Baseball told Trevor Bauer he couldn't play for a couple of hundred games. He went back to court, and that was reduced to less of 100 games, lesser of 100 games. One of the things that confuses us in this particular case, this is one of hundreds, is how in the heck did Bauer turn around and get a $300,000+ settlement against Lindsey Hill? Now, I don't want to go into the weeds of it, but the courts came back and said she broke or busted non-disclosure. She said something on Instagram or whatever. This guy who's powerful, who has resources, who has lawyers, they tracked it, went back to court, and essentially this is how she ended up losing this settlement that she received to pay him. And so we talk about in our work how power and wealth among athletes, among doctors like Larry Nassar, among all these people in sports world who are on this underbelly that we don't hear much about in this highly respected institution. So I'll stop there and let my colleague, Professor Angela Hattery, say something.
Really quick before Angie jumps in here, I like pointing out that sports themselves are institutions, because like the whole point of these sports organizations is to provide entertainment, but it's entertainment at a cost. And if you're looking at these organizations, the MLB, the NFL, the NCAA, as businesses, because that's how they operate, you have people on staff who are high ups at all these schools, all these teams, that's whole job is to market. Jerry Jones does a great job of marketing the Cowboys. How can you be America's team and not win a Super Bowl in years? But if the whole focus is to make money, when it's these athletes like Trevor Bauer who wins a Cy Young Award, you don't win a Cy Young if you're not very good at what you're doing. When Deshaun Watson gets traded to the from the Texans to the Browns, and at that time one of the better quarterbacks starting in the NFL. When you have these athletes that are very good at what they do, the business side has to come into account here for these organizations. Be like, well, if we can bury this, or if we can have the punishment be served and like, all right, cool, they did the bare minimum here. Now we can get back to making money off of these athletes. Kobe Bryant having sexual assault allegations against him. Cristiano Ronaldo, two of the most influential athletes of those sports at the height of their careers. Those stories get buried because you can't make money off players if they're not playing. So I like the call of the institutions because, yeah.
Let me, Angie, if I can just say one thing. We went on the road at the time of the incident in Colorado with Kobe Bryant. And at the time, he was very, very popular. We were on the road doing a talk at a college. And one of the issues I remember dearly is the resistance and pushback. These were young students. The ones resisting and pushing back were males. But the resistance was tough. They did not want to hear it. They did not believe that woman that worked in that hotel. And I can't remember how we left that room that night, but I was highly agitated that people in a university setting weren't even receptive to this dissemination of some information about an incident that was in the news at that time. They didn't believe her at all. Yeah. And we always argue, if you pay the money and continue to say you didn't do it, there's a disconnect. Yeah. Something doesn't, I'm not going to pay for something I didn't do.
Yeah.
Anyway, Angie.
Well, I guess I would love to take it. Thank you for that. I'd love to take it back, I think, to maybe where you started, Sean, and that is, how did we get here, right? Like sports. I love to watch sports too. I guess I live in a world where I believe that two things can be true. I can love to watch sports, and I can expect people not to harm other people. I think that is it's a fair expectation. But I want to go back a second. And I'm thinking of a woman who's featured in a documentary called Sin by Silence. And the documentary features women who are incarcerated for killing their abusive partners. And one of the things she says in that documentary that's so profound she says that one of her friends finally says to her, I think it's in prison, one of her friends finally says to her, he made an active choice when he was angry not to hit his boss. He made an active choice not to hit his friends. He made an active choice not to hit other people. He made an active choice that you weren't worth not hitting. And when I think about where you opened with sports, violence is not only normalized, but it's actually expected, right? To Earl's point, like, if you watch hockey, you want to see a check, you want to see the fight, you want to see the, front teeth come out. The concussions are totally out of the news because consumers don't want to see the restrictions on the way football would have to be played to not hit people in the head and sustain concussions. So we respond to the consumerism. But I think her point is important. I can make a choice to hit my opponent on the field or the ice or whatever. I can make a choice to do that, and I can still make a choice not to hit you when I come home or not to engage. So reminding ourselves that we can behave one way in one space and choose not to behave in that same way somewhere else. So this idea that it just spills over into real life, I think it's easy to think that just seems like an easy excuse to me. I guess I'll just say that. It seems like an easy excuse. I'd love if I can continue, the discussion. No, go ahead, Sean, please.
Sorry, really. I like to use sports, especially when I'm working with young men, to help explain consent. Because what you were pointing out there is exactly the conversation that I end up having with them. Is because if they're football players, right? They understand that, well, yeah, when I'm on the field, like, I have to be aggressive, right? Like, if I'm playing defensive end, like, I'm passive, my coach isn't going to play me. I'm not seeing the field. So I have to be aggressive on the field. But they also understand, like, if you're on the sideline, you can't be hit. You are no longer consenting to the rules of the game, because the rules of the game dictate if you're on the sideline, you cannot be touched. Basically, the way the NFL is going is essentially we're going to get to a point where quarterbacks aren't going to be able to be touched. Because of all the rules that are put in place to protect quarterbacks. Just whatever arguments you have about penalties that are called in defense for roughing the passer, which I have my own qualms with that. There's rules that have to be followed, and by stepping onto the field, you are following the rules that everyone has agreed to. And as soon as you do something outside of those rules that everyone has agreed to, you're penalized for it. You get a red card in soccer, you get sent to the box in hockey. So if we can understand that while you're on the field engaging in this activity, these are the rules. And once you are off that field, those rules are no longer applying to everybody because they're not agreeing to play. You should be able to understand what consent looks like in a sexual encounter. Because if you have to agree and know everything you're agreeing to before it happens, just like you have to on the field, on the pitch, on the court, then you should be able to understand that these are the rules I have to follow here.
And I think part of the problem comes in that I totally agree with you. One of the things I've always loved about student athletes is they don't argue grades. And I think that that's largely because they're used to a referee, a ref, and whoever the person is says that's not okay. And you can argue all you want, but it's not going to change, right? So they're used to that environment. There's no referee, there's no ump, right? So in your analogy, which I think is fabulous, we as a society, coaches, parents, no one's on the sidelines saying, oh, wait a sec, you weren't supposed to do that, right? Rather, we have the opposite message, right? The opposite message is, oh, this is just what boys do. Oh, this is just how boys behave. Oh, he just got a little bit out of control. Bobby Knight famously says, if you're going to get raped, lie back and enjoy it. We have so many cultural messages that are effectively the referee in your example, right? So I think the work has to move beyond. I love the analogy. Who's going to step up and be the ref? Where's the accountability? Where's the person that's going to enforce the rules? Because to me, it feels like the exact opposite is happening.
Andy, when we talked to prepare for this discussion, you said you wanted to say something about high esteem athletes and how that factors into our discussion of gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, I think y'all have really already talked about it. But I think I don't think it's just, I think we can look beyond sports. I think we can look into all walks of life and see that we will make, as a society, we will make excuses, for anyone who we believe has power and privilege, or is a hero, or people we look up to, whether that's a politician, whether that's a religious leader, whether that's my commander in the military or my professor in the classroom. The case with that, or I think where athletes intersect best in that analogy is entertainers, because they're in the public view and everybody knows who they are, right? So nobody really cares if the professor or, a low-level politician, they're not somebody that everyone pays attention to. But when it becomes people who we believe we have a relationship with, right? Then it becomes harder to see them as complicated people who might both be really great at throwing a pass or, whatever it is, and people who can harm. We are very resistant to that. I think Sean made the point, just to underscore it. Capitalism is driving the train, right? I will overlook anything. And the last election tells us that. I will overlook anything if I can rationalize that something I want is going to come from this.
Yeah, but if I'm having a discussion in class, I don't care what it's about. And, we're using textbook prompts. I'll always come back to a student. I'm saying, okay, can you stand up and tell the class what this means? And here's how I want you to tell it. I want you to explain this so that it's understandable to a fifth grader. I want a fifth grader to understand this. So when you trot out high-profile names like Deshaun Watson, the guy whose father is a Hall of Fame tight end, I forget his name, who's in prison for raping elderly women.
Oh, Darren Sharper.
Well, Sharper for multiple. The guy that played for Miami, tight end. It'll come to me. We have people like Jameis Winston. We have all these people who are big names. Now you're telling fifth graders, how do you square with the issue of accountability? How do you square with the issue of institutional betrayal? How do we get these young people to understand this is how it really works in American society when you have money and you have power and you have prestige, because these rules that apply to Earl Smith don't apply to them. And we have 500 plus cases in this database that tells us that.
Kellen Winslow.
Kellen Winslow, that's right. His father's a Hall of Famer. He said playing football is like going to war. All right? It's not, but he thought it was. Mm-hmm. And he used that to prey on, quote, elderly women. I mean, how do we tell these little kids this is what's happening out there, even though when they grow up, they'll probably buy that high-priced World Cup ticket. Mm-hmm. They'll buy that high-priced ticket to the ballpark. They'll pay $10 for a hot dog. And the pitcher that's on the mound has either just been brought back after a few games suspension or no suspension at all. Mm-hmm. It's contradictory, and it actually doesn't make sense. That's what I'm pushing you to tell us about.
And I think that's some of the things that we're seeing too, like currently with some players in the NFL. It's like you've got Rashee Rice and all the stuff that's happened with him. You have Tyreek Hill, who has had multiple allegations of domestic violence throughout his life and still was still able to get contracts. And the only reason he's not currently signed to a team was an injury that he had. Not because of his off-field things, not because of the harm that he had caused the people that he was supposed to love and care about, but because he was injured. And I was a betting man, and I had to put money on it. I can almost guarantee that Josh Jacobs will not receive any punishment from the NFL this year. If he gets suspended, it's going to be only for a couple games, because Josh Jacobs is a good running back. And they will find a way to make sure that he gets back on the field, because your product in Green Bay isn't as good if Josh Jacobs is not their starting running back. So they will find a way to make sure that they can put the best product on the field that they can, regardless of the harm that he has caused off the field. Because like we talked about, it's the names that people know and the good, like the really good players that are the ones that seemingly either get the slap on the wrists or nothing at all. It's not the practice squad guy. Because if a practice squad guy does it, it's really easy for a team to say, like, I'll eat the $200,000 contract we gave them. That doesn't hurt us in the long run. We can punish this guy for that behavior. But if it's our $50 million wide receiver, well, now we can't eat that. If we eat that cost, that's going to hurt us. So regardless of what they're doing off the field, we'll make the justifications necessary to make sure that player sees the field. Deshaun Watson should not be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But everything out of the Browns camp is that Deshaun Watson is currently fighting with Shedeur Sanders to be the starting QB.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's, one way of thinking about it is to pull out from sports a little bit and think about the value calculation. We have tons of examples in other areas where a company makes a decision to allow something to continue because paying the lawsuit is cheaper than fixing the problem. And, there's this classic case of like the Honda Civic, the injection, the key, the ignition key. There was a faulty, maybe it was a Toyota, I don't remember, but you put the ignition key in and there was something faulty and the car would explode, right? And they knew about it. And they paid lawsuits. Drug companies do the same thing. Lots of companies do the same thing. They tolerate the thing until it becomes too expensive not to. And I think sports is similar. That to your points about I'll eat the $200,000 for the guy that's not going to win me the championship anyway, but I'm not going to eat the $50 million contract. I'm also living in a world where I falsely believe that this person will win the championship, which is going to, this is the Jameis Winston story, right? The Jameis Winston story, the rape charge, allegation, investigation, none of that happens until he wins the national championship and the Heisman Trophy. And Florida State is betting on the money, the windfall that's going to come from those two things happening, right? So they bury the rape allegation as long as they can. So I think it's both like, what am I willing to eat and what future prospect that I will win something am I willing to eat in order to make this right? And I don't think in some ways it's any different than a drug company that keeps a drug on the market until they've paid it, the Sacklers, until you've paid enough out and it's become too shameful. Your incentive is there to eat it, bury it. But I also want to use value in another way, and that is, I think too often we don't talk about the way in which we treat allegations and experiences of different forms of gender-based violence. The culture is full of us talking about that is not that important, that can't be that big of a deal. If Jerry Sandusky, who I know Earl's going to talk about, rapes a few more kids, it's just a few more kids, right? Like we don't value what happens to people when harm is done. That value I mean, that's what we call rape culture, right? Like, it can't be that bad. Why would you want to derail Jameis Winston's future over this thing, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell a quick story from my master's defense. My master's thesis was about sexual violence. And one of the men, a faculty member on the committee, when we were talking about marital rape, said, I don't understand the problem here. Sometimes I have to wash the dishes when I don't want to. I mean, I'll just mute. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, that's yeah. And that goes to like, oh, sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
So one of the rabbit holes that I went down was reading the personal conduct policy of the NFL. And it, to me, I mean, very much reads as don't do things that make us look bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you do things that make us look bad, then we might have to punish you for it. And it just, you know, like the words are there that make it, you know, oh, don't, you know, because you need to be held at a higher standard and blah, 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 blah. But that's not the way that it feels when I read it. You know what I mean? Like you can tell that it's just very much protect us so that we can protect you.
I'll add a footnote to that, Amanda. Roger Goodell, who's the head of the National Football League, he works for the owners, by the way. Roger Goodell told us after the Ray Rice incident, where they imposed this few hours or few days punishment on Ray Rice for beating up his fiance, until somebody snuck in a videotape of the incident.
Mm-hmm. So
Roger and Sean says he worked in PR for a few minutes, a couple of months. So Roger employed that department. They went out and hired 7 or 8 very well qualified female lawyers. And they were going to hold the NFL and that policy you mentioned, Amanda, accountable. Not one of those lawyers lasted. Not one, if I have it correct. They all walked away because they said that policy was just what you called it, some words on paper. There was nothing of strength behind it, and it was a gimmick to bring these 7 or 8 women in to address their domestic violence problem in the NFL.
I'd be curious, Amanda, if you noticed in reading that policy that sanctions for things like domestic violence, sexual violence, strangulation are about the same as drunk driving.
Yeah, one of the things that I read said something about like, you know, acts of violence, including dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, blah, 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 blah. Those will, on an average, receive a sanction of 6 games, whereas being caught with marijuana was a sanction of 2 games. Like, are we really gonna put those 2 things within 4 games of each other? In the NFL, they play a game every week. Like, how is that?
It can get worse. Because, as a Detroit Lions fan, when Jamison Williams gets suspended for 4 games for gambling on college football as an NFL player, because he made the bets in a team facility, which is not something you should do. Which, yes, he broke the rules, right? When Tyreek Hill doesn't get a suspension for accusations of domestic violence after in 2014 pleading guilty to domestic violence, and then being also having had allegations of child abuse in 2019, when, if I remember this correctly, dangled a child from a high height over a balcony, did not receive punishment from the NFL. The only reason Ray Rice got banned from the league was because of the video evidence of him doing it. Kareem Hunt only got an 8-game suspension after the video of him abusing his partner, or that woman at the time, came out.
I'm just going to say, I sometimes have to wash the dishes when I don't want to. I think what you're describing is exactly back to what I heard 30 years ago in my master's thesis. Marijuana, drugs, these things are interchangeable with harm of people, right? Yeah. That's kind of the culture that we live in. It's not very optimistic, but I think it's true.
It's like, okay, you broke the code of conduct. We're just calling it that. You broke the code of conduct. It could have been for anything. That's putting somebody who got caught urinating behind a bar on the same list as somebody who like actively chose to sexually assault children. Like, yes, they're both crimes. No, they're not both the same.
And I think, especially going to your point, Angie, is like what that awful person said during your defense of your master's. It, like we Earl was talked about earlier, where it normalizes this behavior, but also what is this messaging giving to especially a lot of young boys who watch these sports and idolize these athletes? It was talked about a little bit already, but if I'm looking at the Tyreek Hill situation, the Rashee Rice situation, the Deshaun Watson, if I'm Justin Tucker, if I'm looking at these athletes and seeing these men who are some of the best at their respective positions, at least at the times, have these accusations happen against them, but then have the league really not have any real repercussions to them, what does that tell me as a young boy watching these athletes?
I mean, I think, you have a toddler. I think it's the same when we allow the toddler to get what they want when they throw a tantrum. What are we going to get next week?
Yeah.
But I think it's bigger than that. I think it is that, but I think it's also young men and women, boys and girls growing up watching athletes. That's because that's who we're talking about, but it could also be entertainers. They're growing up watching TikTok and Instagram, a culture in which women are commodities, right? So the goal, if I'm going to be a man, is to have a lot of sexual partners, let everybody know about it, like have lots of beautiful women around me, et cetera, et cetera. And then if I mess up in some way, I don't need to worry about it because look at what happened to Tyreek Hill. So I don't think it starts with the knocking the woman unconscious as Ray Rice did, because I'm assuming maybe some of the people listening to your podcast are too young to remember. He knocked her unconscious, right? Dragged her out of an elevator. The lesson from that, I don't think starts at that event. I think it starts earlier by, the goal is for me to just have as many sexual partners as I can. And if they agree, great, that's easier. If they don't, it's still part of the mission of, so it's embedded in, I guess what I'm trying to say is embedded in that deeper culture of what messages of masculinity famous athletes are also putting out on Instagram and making accessible to young people.
Well, you've got these people who are more or less, I mean, they're celebrities, right? Like they're famous, they have lots of money, and with all of that comes privilege. And that's a huge thing that I think a lot of people choose not to acknowledge. If you're good enough, if you make enough money for your league, if you make enough money, if you bring in enough fans, we'll forget some of those other things that you do because we're still on the positives of what you can provide for us. And that really is a disservice to people as human beings, because if you are never actually held to that higher standard of you need to be a better person because you're a role model for so many young people. You ask, I don't know, most young kids who have any kind of inkling towards sports, what do you want to be when you grow up? Most of them are going to say, like, I want to be a football star. I want to be a basketball star. And this is the role model that they have to look up to.
Well, we didn't talk about boxing at all. A lot of boxes in our database.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm waiting for the Mike Tyson story to be written. And we sort of fawn over Gus D'Amato as being this great trainer, lots of champions besides Tyson. And I'm just wondering what that Catskills, upstate New York camp was actually like. You know, what were the day-to-day happenings in that isolated camp up there? And what was Gus teaching Mike besides how to throw a left hook? Because this guy is all over the toxic masculinity map. And the things he's done to young women throughout his life, not just the young woman that sent him to youth prison, but other women that he beat up and assaulted, etc. It's crazy, and you know, toxic masculinity has become a common phrase these days. But when you get inside of it, it's deadly. And when Amanda says, "Well, what are you teaching these young people?" You're teaching them to emulate those rich, famous, big muscles, you know, strong guys. You're teaching them to emulate those people when they grow up. And how do we know it? We know it because of the violence in youth sports. We know it the way the parents behave in youth sports parents. I mean, if I watch TikTok, and I don't, I can get, by scrolling, I can get those scenes in the gymnasium where the parents are flying out of the stands, running on the floor, jumping on the referees. It's constant. I even see it at graduation ceremonies these days. It's everywhere, and the word is that's how you should behave.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get ahead in American society, that's how you should behave.
So how do you counter? How do you counter with a guy like Tim Duncan? Right, Tim Duncan, undeniably sorry, Amanda, you probably don't know who he is, but he's not playing anymore. But arguably, honestly, one of the best players in the NBA in all time. Not in the top 10, perhaps, but in the top 20. I mean, he's arguably one of the best players in the NBA. 5, 6, what is it, Earl? 6 world championships or NBA titles. No rap sheet on this guy. Why do people not wear Tim Duncan jerseys unless you live in San Antonio 10 years ago?
Or Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Because he went to Wake Forest. Why is he not the role model, right? Why is he, Russell Wilson, or one of these guys that's super successful and not by any measure we can find doing this stuff? We instead, the ones who are getting our attention are the ones who are behaving in this flashy, showy, more hypermasculine way.
I want to get in a footnote on Tim Duncan.
Please.
We both taught at Wake Forest University, and when Tim Duncan was there, when college athletes spent 4 years in college.
And actually went into classrooms. There was a day when they went into the classroom.
But the scoop on Tim Duncan, as he signed posters for us and staff to give to our kids, et cetera, on his way out the door. The rap on Tim Duncan, and Sean started off by talking about what season we're in now for all these sports teams and finals, et cetera, was whether or not he had the stamina to play the NBA season, because the college season is shorter than the NBA season, and he was just skinny guy. Whether he had enough stamina to play in the NBA. I'll never forget that. That was the rap when he was being drafted.
And if you revisit it, maybe what was underneath, does he have the stamina, was maybe keyword for, is he too nice? Yeah. Is he too good of a human being?
Even looking at photos of Tim Duncan, especially like around then, like he's not Shaq sized, which I would argue, if I'm questioning between the two of them, who has the more stamina to play a full NBA season? Is Shaq at that size have the stamina to play a full season? Like,
and what he's talking about, Amanda, is like 350 pounds, right? Like Shaq is not in great shape.
If I had to, looking at Shaq,
I do know who Shaq is.
Do you know Shaq because of the one movie that he starred in like years ago that was not very good?
No, he's just
because he does Papa John pizzas.
Honestly,
nice.
I couldn't even tell you probably what team he played for, but I could recognize him just because of publicity things. So,
listen,
and that's part of it too, though, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
if it's not just how good of a player you are, it's how much publicity you can get. What are you doing out in the rest of the world? And whether that is good or bad things is where you're gonna, get some defining moments here. But like a lot of people in publicity say, all publicity is good publicity because it makes you more known to people. There could be things about Shaq that I don't know of that, but I still know his name because of some of the other stuff. So just because I don't know maybe some of the bad things that have happened, you still have the publicity of the name.
To put it this way, he had pretty good elbows.
Yeah. I will say
That's okay. They'll fly right over top of my head. So
yeah, he had them.
I will say, looking at the database too, I was a little bummed when I, growing up, realized I had a Chauncey Billups jersey, and seeing Chauncey Billups' name on that list, and never hearing that story about Chauncey Billups. So like, how many athletes have I rooted for? Where I'm like, man, I did not recognize or see like any of those stories. It's like, as a kid, I'm like, Pistons are good. I'm gonna keep rooting for the Pistons. I'm gonna wear Chauncey Billups' jersey. Tayshaun Prince, one of my favorite players, in part because Tayshaun, I was like, I like that guy.
Well, your main man back in Detroit, Thomas.
Yeah.
Isaiah
Thomas, yeah. Yeah, so it's like when we they're thinking about some of these athletes too, it's like if they're good enough, those stories just may get buried. And in
today's world, I think, and this is a little bit of what I'm learning from my students when we talk about the database and they look up people like Jameis Winston, who is still playing. If these days you can pay money to get the internet scrubbed. So not only does the team bury the story, but you can move those things off the top 3 pages of the Google search, right?
and
go ahead.
Yeah, it's just, and even because like I said, I had Sean send me some names to start looking up or whatever. I had to specifically put in the Google search like XYZ player DV charges in order to find them. It wasn't coming up when I just put the players' names in. I get all the stats, I get all the teams they played for, I get a whole Wikipedia page that's got literally like decades of who they played for and how many scores they had. But there's nothing on there about those charges. And even if they were suspended for some reason and that information is on there, it doesn't tell you why.
I would love to just talk for a couple minutes. I know we're running on time, but to point out, because we haven't really said this, the database is not meant to be a shame board. It is not meant to be a place to do harm to people. What it's really meant for is to catalog and be able to demonstrate patterns that these things that happen are not isolated. And so one of the inspirations for the database was the mass shooter database that some colleagues have put together. And one of the, who wants to talk about mass shootings? But the cool thing about the database is that you can search it on multiple filters, the same way that you can search our database. And if you look at the mass shooter database, what you'll find is 54% or so of mass shootings start with an act of gender-based violence. You can filter to see the majority of mass shooters are men, white, young, etc., that there are patterns to this thing that feels out of control and feels really scary, and it is really scary. But we can't solve it if we don't understand what the patterns are. The database was meant to do the same thing. It was meant to say there are patterns to the violence in sports world. It doesn't happen in the same way in every sport, for example. We just wrote a paper about, quote, non-Olympic or Olympic sports, non-revenue sports. So we looked at swimming and track and some of the sports, golf, that are never, sort of on the main page of ESPN. And what you find when you look at those sports is that the harm is most often done by a coach or a team doctor or a trainer. So that's a story of you allow a staff to continue to have access to players, and they are going to abuse dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. Football, basketball, Major League Baseball, soccer, those patterns are men who are doing what we've been talking about today, which is abuse partners, acquaintances, strangers, women using sexual and domestic violence tactics for the most part. And so I want to just be clear that the database isn't there it's not a scarlet letter. It's there to try to help us see the patterns so that we can see the root cause and try to come up with solutions that will actually work. Right.
Right. And then you have to ask yourself, like, as a society, are those sports less likely to produce people who are abusive toward their partners, towards other people as players, because they don't have the limelight? They're not on that front page. They're not held to this, I have to be this big bad person standard? Or is it because those sports are less violent in nature? Or is it because the people who are drawn to those specific sports maybe have a little bit of less like trying to stay away from violence? I don't know how I'm trying to say. I can't think of words right now, but like they're less inclined to violence. Maybe some little kid who's like, I don't want to run into people. I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hurt, isn't then going to be drawn to a sport like football, where they're probably going to get hit and hurt. They might be drawn to a sport like golf, where there's no contact in that.
So one of the things we argued in the article that we published about it is that if you think about sports like soccer and swimming and track, kids play those sports in a gender segregated setting for much longer than they play other sports. Mm-hmm. They play together. There's gender equity. Another thing that happens at the college level, for sure at high school, but also at college, is even if you're at a D1 school with a really great swimming team, odds are the men and the women swim together. They share the same coaching staff. Often those coaches can be women, not just men. So part of what happens in those sports is you have much less gender segregation and more gender equality, more women who show up at swimming, who are your teammate, who you want to win. She needs to win because she's winning points, right? She's accumulating points for your team. So she's your colleague, she's your peer, she's your coach, she's your trainer. She's not your cheerleader or your groupie or your sex toy. Right? She occupies a different space. And so what lessons might be being learned, not necessarily on purpose. I'm not saying whoa, like, welcome to youth soccer where we're teaching gender equity, but we might implicitly be teaching some different lessons.
Yeah,
that's beautiful to me.
Even thinking about it from like my time as a soccer player, like absolutely, like I played on co-ed soccer teams pretty much all the way up until I was playing in high school.
Yeah.
In part, money for travel teams where it is more gender segregated didn't have it. But even in high school, we would routinely practice against the girls' soccer team. And I remember playing against them and thinking, they're beating my ass. It's like I'm playing defense and they're just, I can't do anything. Like they're just better. So it's like it gives you the opportunity to learn and see women in that equal footing, that equal light, or that superior, like higher up light, where if you have a woman who is your head coach or is a coach on your team, like that's someone you're listening to and taking direction from. So you're learning to be able to see women in those positions of power, where in other sports you don't necessarily have that.
Yeah,
Even
I don't think there's any female coaches in like the NFL, right?
not real coaches, not coaches that matter, not coaches that players listen to. And this has nothing, this isn't negative towards those women who are in the NFL, but they're not calling the plays, etc.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to mention is when Sean talks about being on co-ed soccer teams and having coaches who are not men, etc. There are words, terms that are used in the locker room. There's some really good studies of locker room behavior of men's teams, words that are applied to women, etc. Words that are negative and horrible. One of the things I've seen is you don't hear those words tossed around when you're on an integrated team. The 7th and 8th grade boys football team, they hear those words. They hear those words about the quote, the girls. But when you're on an integrated team, you don't hear those words and they're not used. And I think that's very important because the locker room is this coveted place and a lot of negative terminology is tossed around in the locker rooms. Yeah. I mean, we hear things, well, the locker room is sacred and, we have a all teams meeting, no coaches and no female, what do you call them, journalists, sports journalists. We don't want them in here, blah, blah, blah. That place is also a part of this discussion.
Yeah.
Yep.
And not to obviously take up more of your guys' time, but Angie, one of the things that you brought up when you're like talking about like Russell Wilson specifically, about how like he's not held in as high of regard as people maybe like Jameis Winston, even though Jameis Winston has hardly ever been a starting quarterback in the NFL, where Russell Wilson, phenomenal, especially with the Seahawks. And I think it goes to, at least in part, about what we are told as men, what masculinity looks like. Russell Wilson, despite all of his professional accolades as a starting NFL quarterback, doesn't fit that picture as well. Even though if you're looking at masculinity from like the baseline of like what we want as men, to be strong, to be accomplished, to get a hot wife, like Russell Wilson checks every box.
He definitely has a hot wife.
So it's like if you're looking at it from that like bare basic, like what we're told, like Russell Wilson fits the bill very well. But because personality wise, he's like a little goofier, a little bit more unserious, even though like you can say Jameis Winston's unserious also, but he's unserious in a quote unquote funnier way. He doesn't fit that bill, so we're not going to hold him as in high of regard as like, that's what I want to be.
And I think exactly. And I think if you think of Russell Wilson or you think of Tim Duncan as two examples that we've talked about today, who by any measure of masculinity, Tim Duncan had a hot wife too before she left him for another teammate. She was a cheerleader when he met her. But part of what I think you're illuminating here, Sean, is men who are comfortable in their masculinity don't need to overperform it. So Russell Wilson doesn't need to put up naked pictures of his wife, nor does, Tim Duncan, because they're comfortable with who they are. Men who are overperforming are the ones who aren't, right? But those are the ones who will seek the limelight, and they will push those images on themselves to remind themselves, yeah, I am a good guy, right? So I think what you've revealed here, what's coming out into the discussion is the images that young boys grow up seeing are in fact basically curated by men who are insecure about their masculinity. The ones who seek the TikToks and the Instagram and are posting all the time about their sexual exploits are not the guys who feel good about, the guys who are comfortable with that don't need to do it, right? Yeah. So I think young boys, it's easy to see how they could grow up thinking, that's an important ingredient to masculinity, and it's like oversampled, right? Like they're seeing a small percentage of what's true, but they're led to believe that that's what everything is, right?
But in the Russell Wilson story, which came out yesterday, he's retired.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to some Sunday TV football talk show.
Mm-hmm.
But they had to add, in terms of the masculinity piece, is that he's not 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, they had to put that in there, that he's not 6 feet tall.
If you're not 6 feet tall, then what are you even doing?
Exactly.
Yeah, ask Kyler Murray how that goes.
Exactly.
Well, we wanted to thank you folks for this hour. And in the moment for the discussion we had for this hour, we could have added lots of cases. We could have gone down the rabbit hole on, accountability and the legal issues and, what happens when you pay somebody not to show up in court. And, we have the best FBI, CIA agencies on the planet, but they can't find these people who are supposed to show up for court when they, and then quickly within that 30 minutes, throw out the case. So there's a lot we could have added to this discussion, but the piece that we really need to talk about is what happens after all these horrific events. Jerry Sandusky was the assistant coach, defensive coach at the legendary Pennsylvania State football team headed up by Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno was told at his kitchen table by one of his coaches that they saw sexual assaults taking place in the locker room between Jerry Sandusky and kids. They told him at his kitchen table, and he never did a damn thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not one thing. And the Penn State story is huge because it involves so many non-football people. The president of the university, I mean, on and on and on. And we want to talk about that, and we want to talk about the legacy and the aftermath, because some of those victims, survivors, today, who are in their late 20s and 30s, are telling us what their lives have been about. And some have done so publicly, because at the time when they were kids, they weren't identified. They were identified as victim 1, victim 2, etc. Mm-hmm. And some of those stories are just as horrific as to what we knew Sandusky was doing, who's serving multiple life sentences, or at least one life sentence. We also want to talk about a case that never hits the news, and that's Javon Belcher, Kansas City Chiefs, who murdered his partner in front of their kid. And all the news stories that we tracked told us about Javon Belcher, not about the woman he killed or about the kid. And then we want to talk about Ray Caruth, Carolina Panthers superstar, young guy, superstar who either murdered or had murdered his partner who was pregnant, and the kid survived, sort of, who is now, what is it, 30? 30
26.
years? 26, paraplegic, not in the news much anymore, but as he was growing up, they were showing us his progress with his grandmother and trying to walk and learn to walk, etc. And now Ray Caruth is out of prison. So these are some fascinating after stories about the violence that takes place today on the field, off the field, and what happens over time. Yeah. And I think this would be a discussion that people would want to be interested in hearing.
Oh, yeah. And it's definitely one we're going to have next episode with both of you. In part also because Earl, and you mentioned this really early on in this episode when we're talking about sports as institutions, especially in the communities that they're in, because sometimes these, especially NFL teams, these schools, some of those sports teams and those colleges or those NFL teams are the biggest either business in that area or like just the biggest thing in that area. So when these crimes happen, when these institutions employ those who are harming people in that community, not only is it impacting the victims, which absolutely needs to be talked about, but the community as a whole is going to have experiences that come from this harm, whether it be from how they're feeling after the harm of these people that they were idolizing and looking up to have harmed people, or how the people who they have harmed end up redoing some of that harm to other people in those communities.
I failed to mention East Lansing, Michigan, Michigan State. I mean, they had multiple issues with the administration of the university, with the Larry Nassers, with the Mel Tuckers. That place is just run over with horrific crimes. It's incredible that it's still standing. I mean, can you land in East Lansing? Does it still exist? It's incredible what went on there, and all those administrators who knew what was happening in both cases, gone.
Yeah.
Even reputations ruined forever.
And even looking at that, the case with Larry Nassar, U of M had the same issue. I think it was Robert Anderson was his name, and he had sexually assaulted tons of athletes over his career. But
About
that was
1,000.
one. Yeah. Which, not to compare numbers here, that is 5 times as many athletes as Larry Nassar sexually assaulted. Robert Anderson's story came and went almost immediately. So
he even assaulted the great coach at Michigan's kid, Woody Hayes.
No, Bo Schembechler.
Bo Schembechler. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, one of those guys.
Yeah. So these things have lasting impacts on the communities that they're in, and that is something that we are going to have a full conversation on next time with Angie and Earl. So before we sign out today, is there anything that you would want to make sure that the audience takes away from this? Like, if you had a quick, just little thing, what would be that thing?
For me, the quick little thing is kind of always the same. It's that this is actually preventable. That for all the harm we're talking about, and we'll talk next week or next episode about the long-term impact on the community, all of this is actually preventable. And I'm really happy that at the end of the conversation, we explored a little bit what happens when we engage in gender integration and instead of gender segregation, when we promote gender equality. It doesn't mean every single person is going to behave, but I wouldn't be doing this work after all these years if I didn't still firmly believe all of this stuff is preventable.
I would end, since I'm tossing around the names of famous people, artists, politicians, etc., Maya Angelou, I would also add the late Jesse Jackson, keep hope alive. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I've genuinely enjoyed this conversation. It's always fun. I could talk about something that I spend most of my free time doing. So thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been great.
Thank you.
And then before we sign out, if they wanted to find any of you on social media or anything, where can they check you guys out?
We'd love to invite you to our website, which is www.smithandhattery, SMITHANDHATTERY.com. At that website, you can find us, you can find our database, which we would love for you to spend time exploring. You can reach out if you want the real data. And then I'll let Earl mention his social media handles.
I don't use it. The database, what you just said, Smith and Hattery works.
Perfect. I'll make sure I have a link to the website in the show notes.
Thank you.
Especially linking directly to the database. The database, super interesting to look at. I will let you know, Amanda and I both independently of each other, as soon as we pulled it up, immediately checked skateboarders.
And there aren't any, are there?
There was one.
There's one.
There's
There's one. And I was
Okay.
very happy that it wasn't Tony Hawk.
Yes.
I don't know what I would have done if Tony Hawk was on there.
No, my entire like late teens, early 20s life of Tony Hawk Pro Skater would have just gone.
Yeah. So thank you again both for joining us today, and thank you all for listening. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.